Over to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yes, I'm Helena. I'm also from Indonesia with other four of my fellow friends, journalists. And now this is an excited moment for us. In the last 3 days, things happening very quickly. And as Agus mentioned, which is we are going to deep dive more now on what's going on in Indonesia and what happened if the regulations is signed. Well, it's a glimpse of hope. That's most probably it's going to happen next month, hopefully, yeah. And I think also in these sessions we are not only speaking from Indonesian perspective, although we have two senior journalists here in this panel. We also have from Malaysia, Dr. Chamil Waria, Chairman Malaysia Press Institute, and also we have Vibot Partha Sarati, Associate Professor from Center for Culture, Media and Governance from New Delhi. And we have Wahyu. Wahyu is CEO of one of the biggest media in Indonesia, but also as Secretary of Media Associations, which is combined also between big media and also small media, digital based. And we have also Sasmita Madrid, Chairman of Journalist Associations Independent. This is one of the associations that always trying to, it's not criticize, or is it criticize the government regulations most of the time? Opposition, that's what they call. So that's a debate. So we have a pretty good member speakers here, academics and also practitioners. Now we're going to start a little bit deep on what's going on in Indonesia in the last 3 days. And maybe since we are starting discussing the bargaining code, we don't call it bargaining code, we call it publisher rights in Indonesia. Over to you, Wahyu.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I think it's, as Helena and Agus mentioned, it's a pivotal moment for the Indonesian press ecosystem. I think it's a culmination of what we've been working in the last 3 years, started by an invitation from the Press Council, from Agus Sudibyo, who you just hear just now, who was the commissioner of the Press Council. And he initiated the discussion on the bargaining code in Indonesia. And then last February, the president himself, Joko Widodo, announced in front of the participant of our National Press Day that the government has opened the door for the regulation and promised that the regulation will be finalized within 1 month. So that was the president's promise that we trying to keep. And I think that's a big symbolic victory at the time. But then 1 month passed and nothing happened. As usual in Indonesia, we are not very surprised. But we then try to find out what really happens behind the closed doors. So even though the regulation was initiated by the Press Council has no access to the deliberation of the regulation. So the Press Council need to submit that draft to the Ministry of Communication and Information. So that was when the ministry revised some of the clauses in the draft. There's a lot of back and forth. And then finally on March this year, they submit, I think in March or April, they submitted the final draft with February was it? With 3 big parts. The first important part was the compensation clause that platforms have to compensate publishers for their good quality journalism. So what is good quality journalism is defined in the regulation, and which platform that has to pay the compensation also defined in the regulation. The second big important part of the regulation was that there need to be a data sharing mechanism where publishers open their users' data, their demographic, psychographic data to help us to inform publishers to produce more relevant content that are needed by our audience. The third important part is the algorithm accountability. So we want the regulation wants the platform to open insights about how the algorithm works and inform publishers before any big changes happen in the algorithm. So those was the three big principles, and nothing happened. And when the ministry submitted the draft to the president office, and last week, my association, the Indonesian Cyber Media Association, we have 400 digital media as our members. 70% of our members are local, independent media across the country. And we asked for an audience with the press council to demand what is happening, why there is a silence in the process of negotiating the final draft. And then we published the story about that event. Almost all of our members published that story, 400 stories at the same day. And then the president responded. He asked the minister to speed up the process. And in the last 3 days, as mentioned earlier, there have been marathon meetings between the ministries of communication, ministries of law and human rights, the state secretariat, and the press council, and also platforms. Google was invited, also attended the meetings, and they come up with the final draft that was announced yesterday by the press council to the constituents. As Mr. Agus mentioned, the press council has 11 constituencies, which consists of three parts: publishers group, journalist groups, and civil society. Both of our associations are part of the press council, and all of the press council decision needs to be consulted to the 11 constituencies. So that was what they did yesterday. They asked for the constituencies to respond to the final draft, and we did respond. There are some things that we are not agreeing with, and then today they come back to the meetings with the ministries. So there's still things are still being sorted out. So that's what happened.
So that's actually the key, is make noise.
Make noise.
Yeah, make noise by the small publishers. And I think that's exactly, I remember we had that discussions in Medan with Nelson. It's the only key is that you can get through these regulations to be listened by the government is to make everybody union. Like, you have to move together. And he gave me this very, what is it, the kind of, not abbreviation, but if you move together, they cannot break you. And I think this is exactly the sample that Mas Wahyu just mentioned, that small media, big media associations, they move together. And that's the only way that the government eventually listen to them. But just go back to the pro and cons, like, it's a little bit ambitious in that regulations, like you put really high expectations that the platforms also need to share the regulations, the algorithms and also data sharing, which is that's their business models. Australia doesn't pass that because, the only thing that they want to focus is sharing revenues. Is that the pros and cons? Why it takes so long?
Of course, there is a big debate about the details of what is data sharing, what is algorithm accountability. So there's a lot of meetings discussing what exactly the language of those two principles.
Okay.
So I think there's a lot of debates happening around those two.
Yeah. But before I go to you, Mastas, I just want to go to Malaysia. It's a kind of follow-up on what we've... So Malaysia, we invited Malaysian media associations to Indonesian National Day last February. Nelson spoke also in that. Nelson's such kind of inspirations in this whole conversations, I must say. You came to this event, and also there's kind of a changing pivot moment also for you guys. So what's happening now after that meeting?
Okay, thank you, Helena, and also to Michael McCoy today. And actually, in Malaysia, we have just started the ball. Sound very ready. Oh, okay. On. Thank you. Okay, in Malaysia, we just started the ball rolling as far as trying to get big tech for compensation. Only, I think, in April this year. This is a result of myself and a few others, editors, attending the Hari Press National Press Day of Republic Indonesia in February, where I listened intently to Nelson Yap, who was there, talking about the success story of the Australian bargaining code, and also Prof. Rod Sim, who was, I think, online in the same day. So I was inspired by our conversation between myself and Nelson, and also Prof. Rod Sim. I asked him a few questions about the bargaining code, and I felt that we in Malaysia must start our own process. And so a group of us under this association called Malaysian National Press Association, which is basically the members member of the press, print media in Malaysia. So we started our first meeting, and we decided that we must do something so that we would not be left behind as far as getting the big tech to pay for news item that they consume in their social media platform. So what happened is that we have not reached a stage where we are talking about drafting a bill, not yet, but we have recognized that in Malaysia as elsewhere, a healthy media is very vital to make sure that democracy, although not perfect in Malaysia, will function well. So we recognize that over the last 15 years, the digital disruption was so huge that we have to do something. I will not. This is my PowerPoint, but I will not use the PowerPoint for now. So we recognize that in terms of advertising revenue, the numbers may be small, but for Malaysia, it is about 1.7 billion USD dollar a year for 2032, and out of that, 1.5 billion went to three big tech company in Malaysia: Google, Facebook, and now TikTok is number 3 in Malaysia. So these are we are talking about. The rest only get about less than 1 million USD. You can imagine the gap between the digital platform gain from the advertising expenditure, ADX, and what the rest get is so small. So that's one. And as a result, there were newspapers who were a closure of newspapers in Malaysia, and also the newsroom shrink so much. In the heydays, glorious day of the print media, the newsroom accommodated about 400 journalists. But the current model, business model, if they want to stay afloat, they have no choice but to retrench journalists. And between 2015 and until recently, 2,000 journalists were retrenched, and 8,000 other media workers were also out of job. So
Is that trained by the Google?
Yeah.
Or
Pardon?
who's initiated that?
Who?
The training. Who's initiated that?
Training?
Yeah.
There was no training. Retrenched. You are talking about retrenched. Retrenched, yeah. They were out of job.
Oh, okay.
2000 journalists. They were retrenched, not retraining. So they will have to find other things to do. So that is the result of about 80 to 90% of the ADX was swallowed by the big tech. And so we discussed the problem. I was I'm not a publisher, but somehow or other, because of my small knowledge from Nelson and Rodsim, and also from Google, they engaged me as a consultant. So we decided that we must approach the government to help the local publishers. And basically, we have three options. One is to do it ourselves, meaning that we deal directly with Google, Facebook. And it happened that in May, the vice president for news, Google News, was in Kuala Lumpur. So I had the chance to talk to him over dinner. It was a fasting month, so I met him, and I proudly, use what Nelson told me, Rodsim and the rest to him, and he said, no, I don't think Google is interested to deal with the local publishers, the Malaysian publishers directly. And he said, because if you do that, you'll be dependent on external sources, and that will hamper or hinder your freedom to publish. That was the reason given by Google and by Mr. Robert at that time. But I was telling him, I argue back that no, it is not a question of depending on Google or government, but we are actually asking for a fair compensation for the news that they consume on their platform, and they make money, a lot of money, So somehow or other we change the topic to other things.
That's pretty brave.
and as usual, and the discussion ended there, and of course I reported back to the committee, and they said, okay, if that's not possible, then we have the second option. The second option is actually that we ask the government, on our behalf, on the behalf of the publishers, to do the work for us. And I don't think the current government is happy to do that, because since 2018 we have not a very stable government. We have 4 prime ministers between 2018 until today, and of course each of them promised to help, but I don't think they will help, because their preoccupation is to ensure that they stay in power, because they don't have the majority, the simple majority that they needed to govern. They have to work with other small political parties to be in power. So in my view, I don't think they will help us. You're talking about the political will. The political will superficially will be there, but I don't think they will actually go deeper than that.
Yeah.
So we decided to do option 3 briefly. Okay, option 3 is we follow what the Australia is doing. Actually, we tell the government what we want, and government must help us in the sense that we must have a legal framework for Malaysian publishers to negotiate with the big tech.
Datuk Jamil has a detailed presentation which I will share with the participants afterwards, because you've done about it. So I will make sure that we share it with everyone afterwards.
I got my PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Thank you for preparing.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I think that's a very important point that you're saying. The most important things to make sure that no one or no media, no journalist left behind. So maybe we can go to India. What's happening in India? Are we still left behind?
Thanks for this. First of all, thanks to Courtney for pulling me into this conference, and to Michael for ensuring that I actually arrive here very comfortably. Yeah. There is nothing very much on the anvil, but perhaps let me try and spell out the context, which might give a sense of what would actually unfold when things unfold there. And there are 4 important points on the context of the news market in India. One, it's a multilingual news market. Unlike Canada and Australia, which we've been talking about, there are 9 major linguistic markets which are regionally sort of segregated here. And the English language market is the only pan-Indian market catering to upper classes and the elites here. Because of that, of course, they garner a large share of the total revenues. Two, there has traditionally been a high dependence on advertising revenues here. Publishers chose to be ad dependent, both in newspapers and in broadcast news, with the cover price being low. And in newspapers, up to 2/3 of the revenues actually come from ads here. So in a sense, echoes the concern which sort of France had sort of flagged yesterday. Thirdly, and this has been my sort of big claim in some of the work which I have done, India is the case of digital expansion, not digital migration here. So the cash-rich newspapers actually expanded online, not due to the compulsions of following readership or falling ad revenues like in Europe, but from a position of strength. And therefore, online revenues are a secondary revenue stream for these publishers here. Just to throw a number here, the digital ad revenues of newspapers are about 5% of their total revenues here. So it's pretty much marginal in a sense here. And the last sort of piece of the context is that in digital news markets, they are dominated still by the legacy players here. So newspapers, especially including in the regional languages, they expanded into broadcast news 20 years ago, where they retained their market dominance. And subsequently, the same unfolded when they expanded into the online space here. So multilingual markets, ad dependencies, a digital expansion, and dominance by legacy players here. And based on this, I sort of see there are 4 fractures, which in a sense are marking the news market in India, and which will of course determine what kind of things unfold here. The first fracture is between the digital native news publishers and the legacy news publishers here. The digital native news publishers garner a very small share, both of readership and a smaller share of audiences in that market, whereas the legacy news outlets are pretty well endowed and are investing heavily in digital capabilities, both physical and human here. The second fracture is between the marketing team and the editorial team within traditional newspapers here. Okay, and often I hear this from the editorial desk that the folks in the marketing division are not willing to share the kind of data they get from Google and so on and so forth. Yeah. This, in a sense, is indicating 2 different imaginations of how does the marketing team and the editorial team look at the online news market here. The third fracture is between the big tech and publishers. Of course, we've been talking about this for the last day and a half here. And this was very well summed up by a digital news editor I was speaking to. And he said that big tech knows the business models and the metrics followed by the press, but we don't know what their business model or metrics are. Okay, and that essentially is at the heart of the imbalance of power that many of us have been talking about here. The fourth fracture overlaps with the third one here. That's largely the news publishers are domestic players because of FDI caps in the news market, whereas big tech and other third-party data brokers are all foreign players there. So you have a clear sort of fracture between indigenous and foreign interests here. And most debates on digital media policy in India are therefore actually get embedded in larger debates on digital sovereignty here. And this, of course, is something which could be leveraged either way, as there was some discussion on that yesterday itself here. So I think if we recognize these 4 fractures that mark the digital news market, we get a sense of what kind of contests would be expected as we perhaps move towards some sort of intervention on this. I can talk more about recent developments if you want to. I can also
yes,
talk about,
just touch on that. Like what happened now in the
steps,
if there is any discussion.
I think there are 3 sort of problem of having a bear actually. 3 things I would like to sort of draw attention towards. One, of course, was the Competition Commission is entertaining a case by one of the publisher associations. It's called the Digital News Publishers Association, which is a large association of large publishers there, about sort of, unfair practices by big tech here. And to that, another case by the Indian Newspaper Society was also appended there. The argument there largely is in terms of the drain in revenues being caused by big tech. The search, as evidence, what they brought up is the surge in zero-click searches over the last 3 years. publishers claim that they receive less than 50% of what the advertiser is actually spending in the online markets, of course, compared to they have clear benchmark figures in the legacy markets. There is the whole idea of opacity on the ad revenue generation. So it's not just the share of revenue, but the way in which this kind of resources actually is being gathered by the publishers. Yeah. So there's no disclosure on the what basis of this calculation is. So it's going beyond aspects purely of ad share to aspects of visibility. Okay, and in a forthcoming paper of mine, I sort of tried to argue this in the case of what I call enumerative accountability here. Okay, that there is no accountability in terms of the ways in which the whole business of measures and metrics is actually playing out here. The second sort of nudge, I wouldn't call it a push, the second nudge had come in December 22 from a parliamentary subcommittee, which actually proposed creating a digital markets unit within the competition authority. And that, in a sense, was mandated to designate and monitor what they call systematically important digital intermediaries, which are essentially the large big tech players. I think it's also important to try and sort of briefly mention the whole issue of collective bargaining here. I don't know in how many legislations this is actually valid there. And this has been a bit of a sticky issue as far as India is concerned. There are some lawyers who hold that collective bargaining is not something which is entertained by the Competition Commission there. There are others who argue that collective bargaining could be accepted as an exception to anti-competitive horizontal agreements, in a sense, cartels and so on and so forth. There was a case before the Competition Commission where it argued that collective bargaining is permissible when exercised against a dominant business partner and in favor of consumer interest here. Okay, so as and when things unfold and they go to the Competition Commission, after which, of course, they can also go to the court, some of these technicalities will play out here. That's the piece on that.
Thank you.
Anything on mitigation, if you want, I can have.
Yeah, but we can just go to Sasmita first. This is part of the, what is it like? There's always a concern, most probably small media probably will left behind and they're not including in the frame of negotiations. Like, what's your role in that as a chair of independent journalist in Indonesia?
Yeah, thanks, Helena. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for Michael and Tim to inviting Aji. Maybe I want to give a little context of regulation regarding the press Indonesia. In general, Indonesia has had a press law since 1999. This law was created by hard work from press community after the fall of the regime Suharto, regime authoritaire. This law provides protection for journalistic work, although violence against journalists still exists until now. But at least we had this law. It's just that sustainable media has not been regulated in this law. Because of this, regulations are needed for media sustainability. I will convey Aji concern and experience during this discussion on the presidential regulation regarding digital platform responsibilities for quality journalism. There are two main focus that are concerned to Aji. First, Aji encourage the sustainability of media Indonesia with various efforts. One of them is fair and equal cooperation through the regulation of digital platform, responsibility for quality journalism. And Aji initially pushed for this regulation to be started in decree of law or national law, because it would have been stronger. This decree are then main level compared to presidential regulation or other ministerial regulation at Indonesia. But other press organizations agree more with this regulation to be stay informed presidential regulation. The reason is we are worried that the decree will take a long time. It could be 5 years or many years like other decree Indonesia. In the end, the press organization decide to push the government to create a presidential regulation on the responsibility of digital platform for quality journalism. The second focus is that AJI want to protect press freedom in this regulation. Because Indonesia had a bad experience in regime Suharto, regime authoritaire.
Indonesian president.
Yeah, second president Indonesia who control press freedom. The press that criticize the government was banned, like Tempo in 2024. So that the news become his uniform is General Suharto era. Now, this is related to the negotiating agency between digital platform and publisher. AJI does not want this executive board to be under the government and become the entry point for the government to re-regulate the press in Indonesia like in Suharto era. And then another focus is certainty that this regulation can benefit to journalists and non-profit media company. We learning from Australia. We want to make sure whether this regulation will benefit journalists and qualify journalism. This is one we want to ensure in the regulation Indonesia.
Yeah, I just want to enter that. Mas Wahyu, what happened if with this regulation, that Indonesian regulation, what is the mitigation approach in that if the government, this is like a, the conversations right now, who's the implementing agencies and what happened if it's under the government?
What happened if the implementing agency is not with the press council?
Yeah.
I think there is some concern. There are concerns, as Sasmito mentioned. But I think, as we've been discussing since yesterday, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So we have to start with something, and then maybe work our way to refine, making it better once we have it. Because one of the key things the regulation will symbolize is that the press has a role in democracy. The press still has a role in the society. I think that recognition is very important.
Yeah, it's a political bargain also, for the media in Indonesia. But I think I'm start open the floor for questions. If there are any questions from the floor. Yes, Courtney.
Thank you. So, 2 questions. One, in Indonesia, could you talk a little bit more about what does it mean that it's a presidential decree versus, say, a legislation passed by the parliament, and how secure is that? And is that one reason that you see maybe the platforms not making the same threats because they don't think it's actually going to end up being anything scary for them? And then in India, the competition authority took on the case and it said it would release a report, but it's nowhere on their website. Like, did that report happen? Where's the transparency? How can we get greater transparency from the competition authority? Thanks.
Okay. So I think we can just go directly to answer it. Pardon the questions.
Okay.
Wahyu.
I can go first.
Yes, and then Sasmita.
The presidential decree is easier to produce. It's just the president sign it, and it can become a regulation. if we use the law process in the parliament, it will take longer, and it will take more political parties to deliberate and decide on the content. It is more inclusive in a way. Aji from the start advocate for a law instead of a presidential regulation, because it also will benefit the president if he is the one who signed it into regulation, because that will give him more political clout. And yes, the next president can dismantle it if the next president sees it fit. In terms of the threat, even though it's a presidential regulation, the platform still made the threat. If the regulation comes into effect, as we heard from Agus Sudibyo, there were some threats that they will pull out from the news in Indonesia.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything, sir?
Yeah, I think presidential decree is not stronger, but it's first step, and we can revision again after election. Yeah, so it's step by step regulation Indonesia, and then I will add in some little information. This morning, we had still I still had time to attend the press council online meeting with all constituent press council. The last information is that the government is currently harmonizing this regulation with other law. Yeah, but the problem is the negotiation agency for the regulation. Will this agency by under the government or by under the press council?
Yeah.
Or will digital platform and publisher also a participant in this agency? But I think we have to stay in the government and the platform to discussion together to find solution to best solution for regulation Indonesia.
So that's actually can manage their effort to threaten or anything like that. Yeah, because you already come together, including the platforms itself.
Yeah, I think it's strategy press community in Indonesia. We can make regulation this good. Yeah.
Over to you. The questions about this research.
Yeah. I mean, even last time when we met, you asked me about the report, and I said there's not come out. And I'm sorry, even now, right now, I've come and say I don't have the report with me.
No progress.
Normally, the commission actually gives a time frame within which they're supposed to bring out these reports. So this is the way I read the scenario here. There are a bunch of things happening against Google, and of course by Google as well. Google is challenging some fines and so on and so forth. So there is that kind of multiplicity of legal issues around Google which is happening in India. There is also the Digital India Act, which in a sense is this kind of mega sort of legislation which is being planned, a draft of which was supposed to be released in the end of June, and that's still not come here. Then of course there are the privacy bill and so on and so forth. So I think my reading is that individual authorities are a little bit hesitant to come out with their reports in scenarios where that it might sort of clash with reports, outcomes, recommendations of other arms of the institutional architecture here. Okay, and I think that tension between different arms of the architecture is something which is for long defined, in fact held back legislation on many counts. Yeah. Okay, that would be my explanation towards why there is this delay. And of course, explanation as to why the delay is actually,
Yeah. So any other question? Chair. Okay. Money.
Hi, my name is Hani. I work with the Public Interest News Foundation. In Indonesia, I was wondering, is there precedent for a regulatory board like this that's actually independent from government?
Yeah.
And there's a mechanism for that to happen.
the Human Rights National Commission, the Press Council, instead is also a semi-independent state body. There's several independent state auxiliary bodies that are existed within the legal framework.
And any other?
All right.
Seems like we're hanging to hope.
Can I just make one
Yes, please.
in terms of ways forward kind of stuff, especially where folks think they've actually gone forward. I think there are two sort of points for consideration here. Yeah. I think one is this issue of the idea or the spirit of collective bargaining has to be expanded a little bit to start thinking in terms also about other kind of collective efforts. And I think one word which we have missed in the last day or so is the possible role open source analytics can play actually in this. I've talked to a large number of publishers and editors who are sort of trying to make a case that perhaps if at least one section of the ecosystem embraces open source tools for search, CMS, and so on and so forth, perhaps that might change the way in which sort of the party, which at least the dependency sort of tends to work out a little bit more differently. Then the second thing is, I mean, this whole emphasis on associations to lead the collective bargaining process, I think is important. But, I think the associations would need to be resourced a bit better to try and take on tasks of auditing and transparency protocol and so on and so forth. I mean, association of journalists are made of journalists and editors. Okay, so their job is to actually get us to stories, not to try and work out complicated processes of audits, look at metrics, enhance transparency. So I think perhaps looking ahead a little bit in cases where associations have been successful, I think capacity needs to be built there to try and sort of see what then can be done as and when these things get ironed out in the future. Sort of looking 2 or 3 years ahead.
You just go to the maybe last question. Yeah. Not from the audience, but from me. Yeah. It's this. There's looking at the way or down the road. It's still taking some more times for Malaysia or India, to start forming the concept of this bargaining code between the media associations itself. What do you think is needed? We have all capacities here from global communities to push this forward.
Yeah.
Helena, I think in Malaysia, the position is rather complex in the sense that we don't have a strong government, and I don't think the industry can rely on the political will of the government to introduce rather quickly to have this law. And at the same time, the industry is also weak in terms of having a very strong association to champion the issue. And I must say that currently, when I spoke about the group that formed the committee, it's mainly from 4 or 5 big media companies, the like of Media Prima Berhad, who owns 4 TV stations, 3 newspapers title, and I think 7 or 9 radio stations. And also Astro, the biggest media company that actually broadcasts not only local station, but also international. So in that sense, I think we are still lagging far behind even Indonesia. And that's why my Malaysian Press Institute is organizing a forum with regard to this topic on the 25th of July, just to talk about how actually to educate the editors, the publishers, and the media owners on the importance of getting compensation from the big tech. And initially, we invited, we have Nelson Yap to be a panel in that session, and I'm brokenhearted. I told this to Emma McDonald because initially she agreed to be there to tell the success story of the Australia. But nonetheless, I'm pleased that the High Commissioner of Canada in Malaysia, Win Robson, will be there to share the experience of Canada in introducing that online news act. And I hope that, after that forum, we are inviting about 100 participants from all over Malaysia, from Sabah and Sarawak, because like India, Malaysia is also, we have so many languages, at least 5. We have the 4 main languages, which is Malay, English, Chinese, Tamil, and we have also Kadazan, the native of Sabah, a state in Malaysia, and also Dayak or Iban from Sarawak. So you can see that we are talking here about not only like some countries have only English newspapers or TV station or radio, but in Malaysia we have also languages, in the sense that I must say that not only the small media, but these vernacular languages are also lacking in participating in the conversation that we are having now. So I hope that, with 100 participants in that forum, we can actually make, as Helena said, make noise so that the government will hear our concern about the losing of revenue from the current market. But this morning I had a very interesting conversation with also Nelson. We happened to have breakfast together, and there were other ideas that we can promote in that forum as well. And I was informed that even in Australia, the government have introduced a grant to the tune of 30 million to support print, and also to fund journalism if you engage cadet reporters. And I think in Malaysia, we need only not money from the big tech, but also advertising, either state, especially state. And during COVID, we were in 2020 and 2021, probably 2021 and 2022, the government allocated about 200 million ringgit Malaysia, which is about less than 50 million US dollar, to support the newspapers and other news portal. And I hope that these ideas, when Nelson will be there, he can also highlight these ideas so that the government of Malaysia can be kind enough to give money with no string attached. This is the problem. The string attached is a problem, because politicians in Malaysia, they love publicity, and I'm sure
Many politicians love publicity. So
love publicity.
That seems like a character.
And some want to control.
Yeah, but I think the most interesting is that because by today, we are going to launch this principle. Something probably can be tested in Malaysia as well to see to what extent that might be work. So,
if I may, just one point on the factors that are needed to kickstart the negotiation or kickstart this kind of discussions on publisher rights in Malaysia or in India or in any countries. I think one thing that we did in Indonesia was try to get the lowest common denominator for that can be seen as the common interest of all the publishers.
Yeah.
And for us in Indonesia, it's about concern about the direction of our industry. We've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, there is a decline in journalism, a lot of clickbait content, a lot of traffic-oriented content, SEO content, and we are losing the very differentiation that made journalism. So we're losing that relevance to our society. We've seen our audience dwindling down, losing out to influencers, to content creators, And I think that's a general concern for all publishers anyway. And if we can convince them that the publisher right is not only about the compensation, but it's about influencing the ecosystem where, platforms agree to compensate news, to pay for news. I think that's a symbolic victory. And I think that's a recognition of our role and our relevance. I think that's the one key thing that convinced the others in terms of, trying to herd the cat, as Jonathan said in the opening speech.
Yeah. Seaboard.
No, I think, and this is, I'm looking at it from the outside, and I think what happened is that most of the traditional associations which existed, both unions and editors associations, publisher associations, they've more or less kind of dwindled between the early 90s and the late 2000s, when there was massive deregulation. I mean, those 20 years were when the neoliberal media was at sort of more spectacular, seductive best. So I think these traditional bodies more or less got sidelined, or at least they became introverted. And therefore they're largely ossified. There have been efforts to, in a sense, try and revise some of them and get involved in debates. But if you try and look at submissions with the regulator on important matters, you really don't see press associations active there. Of course, you see digital media associations active there. You see manufacturers association active there. ISPs are active there. But the traditional sort of, the hardcore press, the journalistic associations, the unions, we really don't see their submissions there. Okay, and I think that perhaps is something which really needs to be emphasized there. And I do see, I think, given some of the litigation which directly involves them, this might actually happen a bit more in the future. But being sort of going by the experience of the net neutrality debate and quote unquote victory in India 7-8 years ago now, I think the key role there was, of course, of larger coalitions by, as you were saying, everybody involved in the ecosystem of the media, not just the news, but even outside that. I think that sort of coalition approach perhaps is also relatively less threatening to the kind of established interests in the press. So I think that perhaps is one way to try and emphasize in the months ahead.
Yeah, that's it, I think. Thank you.